bunch of other stuff with aliens well before Armageddon came along. So that's just funny because it's like Armageddon and Deep Impact. Now those are twins because I think that was the inexplicable year where what a mystery, where like everybody was making each other's movies, right? So you had like Ants and Bugs Life and Deep Impact and Armageddon and a bunch of others, right? But yeah, to have to link Armageddon and aliens because they both have
the nuclear.
I know,
the nuclear
right,
thing from my it's like riding a nuclear warhead, or you have to nuke it from space. It's like those are just the other sides of my childhood.
It's right practically the same thing, It's just
Independence Day, except the nuke didn't work.
Right.
Yeah, Independence Day was there too.
Yeah.
What do you mean was there? It's still there every 4th of July. Thank you very much.
It was the VHS on the shelf in my living room when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
We did that for a while, actually, yeah. And you watch Independence Day for Independence Day, and, you watch crap. Anyway.
For the rest of the year? Yes, you watch crap for the rest of the year.
Well, I was going to say the Christmas movie for the Christmas movie, but yeah, my brain.
There's a lot of those.
But you know which one I'm thinking. So Nakatomi Plaza.
Jingle,
that I can remember, but not
Die Hard.
But not the freaking thank you. Yeesh. Brains, man. Yeesh. Yep. I can remember the foreign word and name, but I cannot remember the two simple words.
Well, given the desire to fight off cannibals and zombies in the wasteland, has there been really a zombie Christmas movie yet? Because I feel like that's lacking in the oeuvre.
I want to say there is, or at least there's one where like there were like female zombie elves, but I can't remember which movie that would be. No, I know, and it's not a trope that I'm fond of or anything, right? Because this one that Andreas was suggesting I watched last night because I had inexplicable free time and no headspace for the real work that I needed to be doing, and apparently that one is zombie like streamers now, so that as if we needed that to be added.
I was going to say you had inexplicable free time and you actually watched something Andreas told you to watch.
Well, I'm just saying his social ranking is decreased as a result of it. Because, yeah, I think pretty much the best scene in the movie is what he shared through YouTube, and that happens in the first 5 minutes.
It doesn't really goes.
Yeah, it doesn't really pick up from there. Like they stick to their concept, but it was very dry. So, yeah. And it did not live up to my, I knew I was getting my hopes up, but when I made the connection to Land of the Dead, and I know what I'm saying, Land of the Dead isn't exactly fine cinema either, but it's fantastic. So, and I knew when I linked it to that, I was like, yeah, this is going to be a problem. So, but.
Oh, well.
True story. So, should we get started?
I don't know. Did we give you enough runway for the lack of reading you did or actual reading you did? I don't know how much you did.
Oh, I did. Yeah, I did at least 10 chapters worth. So we didn't cover the fight last time, did we? Or we did?
Like halfway.
No, we did. No, we got to them jumping off the roof and killing.
We got through the soul gaze, but I don't think we got to the introductions.
Right. Yeah. I mean... Yeah, because we pretty much cover it, and that's what I remembered. But this morning I got my wires crossed, and I wanted to start with the fight, so I guess we'll skip that. So, the next couple of chapters, it's a lot of in between, right? Because we just had, we had what would have been like a mid book kind of action, but that's how this book goes, right? Like the mid book kind of action is like the duel, and stuff like that. It's just very actiony compared to some of the other ones, as far as like having it spread out through the book. But
the beginning of this book feels like there's 3 plot lines. Like there's vampires, there's like the priests, and then there's the Denarians, and none of them make sense until it's like a little bit past the middle of the book.
Right. Yeah. And then, it's one of those where you find out that it's like actually not so many plot lines. It's all the same thing. And, like I remember thinking the same thing about Stormfront, right? You could say like, he's trying to track down Shadow Man. He's got this thing with Monica Sells, he's got the Marcone stuff and all this other stuff, and then very neatly at the end they're all kind of like tied together in one way or another, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean that's fun, for the style for me and everything like that. So anyway, getting into it, right? So they get into the fight. Michael jumps off the fire escape, decapitates Ursiel, the body liquefies, the coin rolls over and bounces off Dresden's boot, and he goes to pick it up before the slime gets to it from Rasmussen liquefying, and Shiro smashes his wrist with the cane and just says no. And Michael picks it up with the holy napkin and pockets it and everything like that, right? So
Holy handkerchief Antioch.
right. From there, they being the knights, take Dresden back to St. Mary's. So you've got, Michael, Dresden, Sonya, and Shiro, and then they meet Fort Hill at the rear entrance of St. Mary's. And, there's a lot of description of Fort Hill grabbing the coin from Michael as if it might explode, something about all the gingerness and care of a bomb squad technician, right? And then this is where, was somebody saying something?
I was just saying valid.
Yeah, true. Right. And then this is where we get Sonya and Dresden talking religion. One of the main, prominent ones where, Sonya tells him that he's agnostic and, all of this stuff. And it's like, Dresden is just incredibly skeptic and trying not to make fun of him because he's on the other side of what he also experiences normally, right? Where it's like, I'm sorry, you believe in magic, or whatever. But in this case, it's you don't believe in heaven necessarily. You believe the jury's still out, even though an archangel hand delivered you a holy sword and sent you on a crusade. Duh. It's possible I am insane, So
while I appreciate,
or he's an alien,
right?
I appreciate Sonya's awareness that he could just be suffering from an insane delusion.
Right.
There is kind of like, maybe you should just start working with some ideas that you have and see what builds to it and just, but he's also basically acting like the obnoxious vegan in this conversation of like, how do you know that the Knight of the Cross is an atheist? Don't worry, he'll tell you. He just has to like put it out there immediately.
Sure. Right.
Well, to be fair, that's Dresden is the say, how do you know this guy's a wizard? They'll write it in the phone book.
Right. Yeah. So Dresden's the CrossFit in this example, and Sonya's the vegan. Okay, gotcha.
Especially because he's the running later.
So if you've got a CrossFit doing vegan, which one do they tell you about first?
They fight over it, and then they just die of a heart attack.
If you're one guy.
Yeah, no, they fight over it in their head.
Okay.
And then they just have a heart attack.
They'll get it out there in the same sentence, though. They'll say that they can totally do their CrossFit, high intensity, whatever on a vegan diet, and everyone else who says that they're wrong is just an asshole. Like they'll do it in the same breath.
Gotcha. Well, now that we've cheesed off like one person who's either CrossFit or vegan, I probably not both, but yeah. Yeah.
So Andreas' alter ego in the chat that's not there right now.
Right.
Other Andreas.
It's kind of funny, their conversation and going back and forth, because I don't have memory back far enough, but I definitely have told my team, it's like, well, it's probably like this, unless I'm insane, right? I always leave room for that, right? That's why I never say things are 100%. I never 100% say things that are 100%, because you always got to leave room for that flawed perception. But, if Sonya can't believe that a higher level being came down and handed him a magic sword and he's fighting demons, like, how can he believe anything, right? Like, he can't believe evidence in his hand, it's yeah. Where do you go with that? But
either you take the evidence that you have in your own senses, or you just think you're having a delusion.
Right. Yep. So yeah, I actually got the quote. It's possible that I am mad and all of this is a hallucination. Right. So, and then I thought it was vitally important to include in my notes that Shiro made them all turkey and cheese sandwiches. So,
because he's a bro, and that's a solid sandwich.
Right. Yeah. very simple: fats and proteins, carbs, everything you need after hacking up demons in a back alley. So, this, and then at the end of this, basically, I think Michael had left to call Charity. Shira went to make sandwiches. And then when Michael comes back, he explains that he wants Dresden to quit the field, and tells him about the, snippet that we find out very shortly, actually, the snippet of the prophecy that he was given and why. And basically the gist of it is that if Dresden, stays in the mix, then he will die, and so will Chicago, or something like that, right? So, or I might be mixing it with the Ul-Sharavas part, but in any case, Dresden's for sure a goner, is what they're saying.
I think this part is, if he doesn't stay out of the fight, then he will die. If he stays involved, he will die. And so Michael's trying to save his friend.
He gets they will die and Chicago with it or something.
Right. Yeah, that's the missing land. Yeah. Or line. And yeah, anyway. So, yeah. And then Dresden, I think this is internal dialogue, but I think the last line of the chapter is like, "Darn me unto heck," or something like that. So, so this is where Harry gets all pissed off, and he drives back to his apartment. He starts feeding Mister. He can't sleep, and he decides to go do some work in the lab. I think the gist of it from the internal dialogue is that he gets pissed off because, he feels like he's being bullied, somebody's threatening him, and he doesn't like that. Or at least that's how he would normally feel. But this time Michael's doing it. And so it's like, well, how can I be mad at Michael, because he's trying to do it for the right thing and he's trying to save me and stuff. So let's see. Decides he can't sleep because he's too wound up. So he goes to work in the lab. And he starts talking to Bob and starts getting informed about the, dueling protocols and stuff like that. So he wakes Bob up. Bob tells him where his copy of the Code Duello is, and they start talking about the protocols. And, Dresden mostly being an idiot in this case, because we've only got 2 people in the scene. So somebody needs to ask the dumb questions so that we all can learn. But Harry's generally familiar with the protocols of the duel, but Bob is a lot more technically specific, of course. And, that's important because you need to get a second. Your second needs to decide what the weapons are going to be, and whatnot. And I'm going to start mixing scenes between this and Ivy if I keep going. But part of this as well is that he shows Bob he sketches out the sigil from Ursiel, and Bob freaks out and tells him to destroy it right now. And Dresden scowls and starts tearing it up. And then Bob starts explaining the nature of the Fallen and everything like that. And then Dresden gets scared and tears it up into smaller bits, so yeah, that's some good stuff. Yeah, he and Harry, of course, still being the idiot, is trying to discuss with Bob. And Bob's line here is, "You don't know everything, Harry. You don't even know a lot." So, that one's pretty good. But then he talks to Bob about, finding a messenger or an oracle spirit, so that he can get some additional information. And Bob has him go to whichever book, I didn't write it down. And then he sets up a triple circle, which I didn't realize. I don't think I remembered, but basically he's got his copper circle that he starts setting up, but then he chalks out 2 additional outlines around it, which is kind of interesting. And it's Bob's suggestion that he uses the Cabbage Patch doll, because Ul-Sharavas needs a homunculus in order to complete the summoning thing. But usually you do a fresh corpse is, the gold standard, for appeasing the spirit and whatever. And so Bob's like, yeah, whatever, just use a Cabbage Patch doll, which does apparently work, but does get commentary as well, So yeah, I didn't write down enough of it between 8 and 9 for my notes, so I don't remember when they have the conversation, etc. But he summons Olsharavas. The Cabbage Patch Doll is munching, sips down like a glass of whiskey, and then starts munching on Prince Albert in a can tobacco, chewing tobacco, and then they have their conversation and gives first part of the payment is answering like a truthful question, right? And this is where they have the philosophical, like, why do you do what you do? Like, you could live a quiet life, you could be rich, you could be a bunch of things. Why do you choose to suffer? And he's like, shit, I don't know, I've never really thought about it all that much. Don't you think that you should? So
Yeah.
and then right.
See, that scene, we have to then have her doing into a spittoon with the chewing tobacco, like at the end of that sentence. Don't you think you should have? Ka-ping!
Right. Yeah. The Western version of a mic drop. So, got to punctuate that.
She's got a couple of lines where she could do that with.
Yeah.
And if we're going to have a Cabbage Patch Doll with chewing tobacco,
right,
got to take advantage.
I know it makes me giggle just thinking about it, right? Just like it did the first time reading it. And like, do we, claymation? Do we have it like how close to Chucky are we playing this, right? So.
Yeah, not like being overly cutesy about it is funnier.
Right. Sure. Yeah, I mean, because it's got like blonde curls, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's one of the cute dolls, but yeah, anyway, he gets the full the full prophecy, which we already discussed, is pretty much like, sure, if you stay in, you're going to die, but if you don't, all the knights are going to die, and all of Chicago too. It's like, oh, okay, well, let me just pick that thing that nobody ever considers with the trolley problem, that you're the one guy on the railroad tracks and everybody else is on the other track, right? So
yeah,
well, because that trolley problem is very easy to solve. You always divert away from yourself. It's the same like knowing that you have a relative on there versus 100 other people on the side. It's like, well, most people are probably going to save their relative if they like them. Yeah,
I mean, you find out which ones have, a large ego and which ones are more utilitarian, and, a few other things about people as much as anything. And like, thank goodness we don't just run around in a world to have to constantly make those decisions, right? So
one of the ones I saw one time was, the train is coming towards your first cousin, you can divert it and it'll kill 5 of your second cousins. And I was like, oh, okay, that's funny.
Yeah, right. You're like, damn, beat me at my own game, so yeah.
It's like, well, what if you're really close with your first cousin and they're like a sibling? Or alternatively, what if you always hated your first cousin and you never really met your second cousins?
Right. Yeah, I was like, what if, it's geography as much as anything, right? So what if it's the second cousins you hang out with more, and,
Exactly.
Right.
So, yeah. Yep. Okay, so basically he's brooding over Olsharavas's warning and decides to brew some potions. One of the things he had Bob get him was their recipe for counteracting the narcotic effects of vampire venom, and so he starts brewing a couple of doses of that. And my notes here are like, because this kind of encapsulates, 2 and part of a 3rd chapter, like this would probably be like a fade out kind of, episode end or something like that. Made sense to me for the pacing, but the chapters are kind of chopped in weird places, I feel like, for this one. So
yeah, something like potion making and exposition goes in the middle of an episode, and so that you don't end on a calm, boring note. Episodes have to end on tension. I'm
thinking ending on him brooding, and the drama you have establishes the with the with the prophecy and whatnot. So
Well, this one seems
if we
pretty
can
easy.
get
This
it,
would be
you
the
know,
start, would be the aftermath of the fight, right? Because that would be the end of like the end of the last episode would be the head comes
sure,
off type deal.
right,
Then you
right.
get the coin and the St. Mary stuff. Then you get the middle part with Bob, and then now this would be the end.
And that's kind of where I was thinking. And so like you could make an argument that this would be a nothing episode, right? Especially compared to the last one. But like, that's, I mean, that's typical for a lot of pacing, right? Like, I don't know what else we could include in this episode. Like if we had time, right? The next stuff is I say maybe we just start here or whatever, right? But like if we had time at the end of the fight, we could maybe include 15 minutes of the whole, he goes back, he summons Osharavas and everything like that. But I feel like that also compresses the timeline a little bit, even though it does happen relatively immediately after. But the next thing after he starts brewing these potions is Ebenezer calls him. And this is where he starts talking about asteroid Dresden and stuff like that. So let's see. So yeah. So he basically, I think he starts brewing the potions at some point. He goes to sleep, or he fell asleep in his lab. I think he falls asleep in his lab. And so, starting, like ending the episode with him falling asleep, starting it with Ebenezer calls him, and basically you start awake with him, at the episode. That was kind of what came to mind. But like I said, that's what occurred to me while I was doing this. But if it all makes sense, because from here we got Ebenezer, then he gets interrupted by Kincaid and Ivy, and then it kind of goes right. So there isn't any action for a little while. So yeah, Ebenezer calls, he gets startled awake. They're discussing the war and the duel and wards and things like that. Then this is where you get foreshadowing asteroid Dresden, because he's like, oh hey, do you know where my telescope and those logbooks are, and that sort of thing. And Harry kind of muses to himself about how excited they were that he found an asteroid, and then it turned out to be an old Russian satellite, and they nicknamed it asteroid Dresden. There's actually 2 so far places where this gets foreshadowed and whatnot. So and then I think shortly after the phone call, basically he hangs up with Ebenezer, and his ward flame candle kicks off. And the reason why he did that is because Bob is on a mission. We didn't cover that earlier, but he sends Bob to Marcone's place to poke around to see if he can learn anything, because Marcone's goons took a shot at him, or at least he thinks they did. And so while Bob is out, he's got this candle as kind of his backup to help him stay more aware.
Right. So before he sent Bob out was also the discussion of the Shroud of Turin, wasn't it? About why Bob can't find it because it's on the wrong wavelength.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So
important enough to put in there at some point of like,
right.
Bob, give me all the answers.
The middle part is their big, exposition stuff. So
yeah,
that'll eat up a chunk of time.
Sure. Yep. So Dresden freaks out because, his green burning candle immediately turns yellow and then very quickly turns to red. And, basically it's both proximity and metaphysical mass, more or less, because he has an internal discussion about how whatever is coming fast, and it's either gigantic or it's a bunch of them. So he thinks the Reds have finally decided to wipe him out, is one of the things that he's worried about. So he runs up to his front door, and he's got a goodie basket by the front door, with his 44 Magnum that he pulled out from the office because he lost his 357 in Summer Night because it got left on the battlefield somewhere. And then he's got holy water, cloves, salt, and iron filings. So he's ready for most things.
At the stone table.
Well, on the cloud, right? So it's like if
it fell into the lake later.
I know. I was like, some creature either retrieved it or it fell,
Yeah, that's the best option. Or somehow it stayed in Fairy where they don't want it to be.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
I mean, that one's more of a
Yes.
temporary battlefield, though, because they say that those two have to create it in order for that to happen.
Right. Yeah, it's not very strictly speaking, but yeah. But instead of somebody kicking in the door and his wards exploding out and stuff like that, because he starts thinking about, you know, his wards and what he expects them to do and what they're going to be able to accomplish. He even reminisces a little bit about the reason why he's, you know, so uptight is like, not only is there a war on, but somebody did breach his door once upon a time, aka the Toad Demon, you know, from
And they're going to do it again
Spawn,
in 2 books.
right? And so he's kind of freaking, and the whole like hold the line, and then 7 polite knocks at the door, you know, and he's
7.
like, "What now?" Yeah, very
That's a
specifically
lot.
7. Yeah, it is a lot of knocking. Yeah, so and it's Kincaid because Ivy's not there yet. So
Well, you got to make sure that he hears him because he could be asleep in his sub basement.
of all the things though, I gotta imagine Kincaid's got a cop knock. So like, you know, 3 to 5 would have been sufficient, you know. 7 is deliberately, you know, chosen. So
Demanding.
perhaps,
If somebody knocked at my
you
door
know.
for 7 times, I was just like, the fuck is wrong with you? Chill
Well,
out.
and yeah, how do you knock 7 times and still maintain its politeness, right? So,
Yeah.
you know,
You take a beat in between each one. It's like knock,
right.
knock.
But it by 7, you know, it's like you've knocked for like 30 seconds now, dude. We get it.
Well, you
Just
got to
use
make
the
sure the
door.
guy's there because at that point, the person's either really coming to the door annoyed because they want it opened or they're not there.
Right. Maybe he was afraid Dresden was down in his lab. So
That's what I said, asleep in the sub
Yeah.
basement.
right. Yep. Okay, so 7 polite knocks, and they so he's challenging Kincaid through the door, and Kincaid basically says, you know, he's with the archive, you know, they're officiating the duel, etc. And then he's like, how do I know who you are? And so Kincaid slides him documentation under the door, which is kind of interesting that your door has a gap big enough to do that. And then you know, immediately pledges to abide by the rules of hospitality. So then we get, you know, a paragraph of Dresden musing about how it's practically sacred, and you know, that's as good as an ironclad promise as you're going to get, type of thing. Dresden checks the documentation and utters an incantation, which is basically the last password that he was given by the wardens, and you know, a pentacle, you know, glows on the paper, confirming it's authentic and from, you know, the White Council. Basically said, you know, these guys have talked to us, they're legit, and all of that stuff. So you know, it's not impossible to fake, but extremely difficult, you know. So
Oh, if you had
all
somebody
of those,
like you, buddy.
right, you know, sure, but we don't think about those things yet because there's no Black Council. So yeah. I mean, like you gotta wonder, like the Red Court has, you know, wizards and sorcerers, right? Theoretically, like we know that, and we find that out. Like even Mavra, do you think Mavra could have done it, or do you think, you know, she would have left some kind of stain that would have otherwise marred, you know?
I was going to say someone like her probably leaves a stain.
Sure,
I think.
yeah. So
It's
yeah,
also a matter of information, really. It's more about like, do you have the password for the specific thing? So
True.
therefore, can you fake it? And so perhaps after the Battle of Sicily, they'd be able to fake things like that, but maybe not
Sure.
before then, maybe not right now.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, Dresden opens the door, and you know, Kincaid is there, and he's basically like off to the side waiting for Ivy to come down. And you know, Dresden's like, oh my god, she's adorable, she's got to be like 9, you know, or something like that. And she's basically taken those like skip steps that kids do when they've got to take both feet on a step before they go down, and she's holding onto the rail and stuff like that. And there's a, I don't remember the exact dialogue, but there's a conversation between her and Dresden about whether or not Kincaid can be trusted. And she just turns to Kincaid and is like, can you be trusted? Well, you're paid up until April. You know, yeah. See there, Kincaid can be trusted until April. So yeah.
If that's not pragmatism, I don't know what is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and the scene really is kind of adorable and, slightly scary because it's like you got to keep in mind that how afraid Dresden was that whatever was coming. And one thing that I paid attention to a little bit better here and noticed was that Dresden's not getting necessarily anything off of Kincaid. It's when Ivy approaches that he starts feeling the static that he associates with other practitioners. And, over the course of exploring who and what she is, and he's like, holy crap, like she's very possibly senior council level, if not better,
more restricted, more powerful.
Sure.
Well, it's funny because he just met a bunch of fairy queens the last book. You would think he would have had a little bit wider of a scope of his thoughts. I mean, vampire horde, I understand given the situation, but like,
Sure.
there's other things out there right on your
Right.
mind now.
Yeah. Like, how would you compare her to Mab? So, and I got to say, probably she doesn't, honestly. Like, I mean, could she put down the White Council single-handedly? Probably, right? But like because of Mab and Titania's position and point in the world, like I don't think she would rate with them. Like she might,
No, she's probably
she might.
closer to one of the ladies.
Sure, I was gonna say she might bleed them a little bit, but I don't think it would be close.
Well,
So,
yeah, no, it would be the same. Like she could make them bleed in the same way Dresden could, right? A lucky shot
sure.
with some iron or something. But all things being equal, they will flatten you because they
Sure.
are that far above you.
The caveat being time and place and
Right.
whatnot, because
That's always
he's immortal. So
yeah. Like I'm sure Ebenezer could take her in a fight. It would probably cost him, but he could do it.
well, and I was thinking about that too, because it's like if she knows everything theoretically, spoken or written, by the way, because we always focused on the written part before,
Including the internet.
right?
Now,
But forget that, including Merlin's private journals, Ebenezer's private journals, all of the senior council. So it's like she knows what all of their tricks are,
right.
and their deepest, darkest secrets, where they were like, "Oh man, I hope nobody ever hits me on my left Achilles tendon because that's where I'm weakest." She knows all of that shit, and
She gets a leg up.
yeah, she can mirror it. So like, yeah, in a wizard's duel, she would easily, like, certainly one-on-one, she would mop the floor with any single one of them. But that's why I say she could probably, put the hurt on the council entirely if she needed to. So, but yeah. So anyway, some fun world thoughts there. Let's see.
But in terms of making this a TV show, child actors suck.
Okay.
Very often. So having it's incredibly risky to have something like Ivy being so young to try to have it being acted correctly by someone who finding someone of the right age that also has the commensurate amount of skill. It's very difficult. So you can have choices of age her up.
We just gotta find our Natalie Portman.
Right. Or Drew Barrymore or a dozen other, sure, there's loads of kids that are just like wooden and whatever, and let them go to Disney and entertain the next generation of kids or whatever. But you got to find somebody precocious, right, as much as anything. Which there's a challenge there and whatnot. But I could see like a younger Emma Watson pulling it off, right? If you can cast somebody like her, figure out the hair color thing and whatnot. But
or the one who was in all the early Flanagan stuff, and I think she was in the Ghostbusters. What was her name? McKenna Grace or something like that. Like she was a good child actor. Sure. There's usually 2 or 3 every generation.
Right. And with enough money, I mean, we just got to send the council out to find these young child actors, just like they found the Jedi everywhere, so and be like, oh, sorry, you're 10. No, you're too old. We can't train you. So, but yeah.
Your analogy doesn't work here, or at least not in support of your argument.
Doing it for me. It's doing it for me. So, yeah, definitely getting like young Obi-Wan Kenobi flashbacks. And anyway, so Moving on. See, because the problem is like when we're talking about collecting child actresses, the propensity for this to turn really gross and weird and bad so fast is, too high. So we got the Jedi, they were mostly not gross by kidnapping and training children, from everywhere. So, um, all right. So, Dresden stokes the fire. They're talking about the duel. I didn't write down all the details, but some of the important stuff is like they go back and forth. She says, if you don't get your second by, I think it's tomorrow at sundown. It might be today. The days kind of blur together because Dresden doesn't actually get to sleep. But you forfeit, and it's like, okay. And if I forfeit, what happens? I will collect from you personally. Okay. Scary little girl,
Yeah.
And then they talk about, what weapons, and he's like, wait a minute, I thought I get to choose the weapon. She's like, no, I get to choose the categories of weapons, and I choose the old ways, and then you get to choose from these weapons. And then he's like, okay, well, obviously we're going to do energy projection. It's like, of course he can turn you down. Yeah, but I don't have to worry about that until he does. So, he's once again hiding behind protocol.
But it's
so
feels very familiar. If I sent an email, it's off my plate for at least a little
Right,
while until
right.
someone sends it back.
Right. Yeah, it's just the classic, like I could sit here and anticipate all the chess moves and whatever, or I could let you actually play. And not only that, but it's going to buy him time, right? And there's only so many obvious choices in there anyway, because it's like, okay, well, Flesh was one of the ones, and I think she specifically was like, I recommend not doing that one, but it's like at that point you get to choose whatever your weapon, and then you just go strengths, and it's like, you're a wizard and he's a vampire warlord, maybe don't choose that one. I think there's like 5, but will and energy projection and flesh being a few of them. I think skill was one of them, which like they become so broad that they overlap in weird ways that I'm like, what is it, a math competition? Like, so what do you
Well,
do?
that could be like dealer's choice. Like I have skill with a sword and you have skill with a fireball, which
Right,
again amounts
right.
to the same problem.
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, that at that point, it would, like you said, it's just a wild card duel, you
Yeah,
or
Will is the only one that's like an equalizer until you start getting to people like as big as Mab or the mothers, where their will just,
Sure.
or Ferrovax, where their will just crushes you with a thought type deal.
Right. Right.
Batarang.
Well, and will even, like it's almost like a more pure form of the duel, right? Because it's less personal and more like idealistic in the sense that it's like, whoever believes in their cause more, comes out on top as much as anything. But, Ortega's no slouch there either, right? But
Oh yeah,
that's where it's like, other than the fact that Mordite is the weapon of choice, right? If it had been a paintball that they were throwing back and forth at each other, it would have been a very friendly duel. But the whole one of us is about to get evaporated really, fixes
the
that.
paintball becomes what would kill you most on contact. So like for Ortega, it would be like a ball of holy water with garlic in it, and for Dresden, it just would have been a bullet.
Right, exactly. Yeah. All right. So after they settle those couple of little things, basically they end up leaving. They've got to go talk to Ortega and his group.
It's a very important moment of Mr. comes out and gets pets by
yes.
Ivy. And
Kitty, yes.
Dresden gives her the name Ivy.
Right.
That happens right here.
I did have the whole Mr. walks in, but I didn't have the whole kitty part. And, which even freaked Dresden out more. And like, he's watching Kincaid watch her. And even Kincaid is like a little disturbed by this whole thing, which I find is interesting, but yeah. And yes, he's like, well, I'm not going to call you the archive. So, okay, well, what would you call me? Ivy. He answers immediately. Why? Archivey, Ivy. So, okay, call me Ivy. So
there's no ramifications to giving the name to a construct that powerful and that old.
Correct. He certainly didn't, accidentally capture her like a Pokemon by doing this, so, and endear her to him, and so forth. But okay, good points. So he decides to eat some more. and then call Vincent, and then catch Vincent up on what they've learned so far, and whatnot. I think, trying to remember, because there's a couple of these little phone calls to Vincent, and Vincent is up because he was just talking to the police in the other room and whatever. And I'm trying to remember when he figures out that he needs to go to the boat, but that's where he goes next. I don't remember if Vincent gives it to him or how else he came up with that. But
So the boat happens after they go to the party that Marcone is throwing. Isn't because
nope.
Oh no, Anna Valmont is there, but the other ones are gone because already. Okay, never mind.
Also mostly no, but yes, Anna Valmont is there. Like,
Yeah,
because the boat is coming up next, but
yeah, because he sees them get what happens to them.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, I didn't write down enough for that. We get it. He talks to Vincent, I think he basically tells him he's got a lead. Vincent demands to know more, and he's like, well, I don't have any more. That's why it's called a lead and not a solution. Something along those lines. So Dresden calls for Michael and gets Molly instead. Molly says, oh, I don't know, let me go find him. And then Charity picks up the phone and kind of puts him on blast again, because that's what we know and love from Charity. And then like baby Harry gets on the phone for a minute and starts babbling into the phone. Molly comes back and says, sorry, I don't see him. And then Charity's like, Molly, get off the line. Uh-oh. Because they were negotiating the whole, like, no, I'd really rather just talk to Michael. Don't want to talk to mom. Okay, got it. Because she's the troublemaking 14-year-old right now. So yeah, that's 11. 12 leads us into Burnham Harbor, right? So Dresden goes by himself to Burnham Harbor. He talks about how it's all lit up in lights, like a stadium and stuff like that, which is true. If I'm not misremembering, basically this harbor is right next to the aquarium, which is right next to the Field Museum. So as far as like stuff that happens in books, when you actually know the terrain of the area, a lot of this stuff is like right on top of each other, Yeah,
they're very close.
Yeah, in the books, he doesn't make very much. Like, it's maybe like a 5-minute walk, from one to the other.
Yeah, this is the posh, expensive place to have your boat. Which might be very close to where Marcone's going to have his party. Maybe that was why. But
maybe, yeah.
Those docking fees are going to be exorbitant.
Well, if they even pay them, because bad guys, well, thieves, whatever. We're splitting hairs. They're not technically bad guys, but they're criminals. So, but anyway, yeah. So he goes there. He gets out of the car, feels like he's being watched. Decides to think inconspicuous thoughts and goes down to the harbor, to the docks. He finds the Étranger, a modest-sized pleasure boat, walks past it, and then hears somebody on the phone. Decides to stop and listen and watch, and he sees her get into the shower. So he decides that he's going to make a play to try and confirm if the shroud is there, and kind of go from there. Let's see. Yeah, I skipped over there's a montage of him gearing up, basically grabbing his blasting rod and some of his other gear and stuff like that. So he goes in, and basically in the boat there are two fridges, and he opens one up, and it's like an actual fridge, and he opens the other one up, and it's got a strong box inside. And so he grabs the strong box and starts to open it, and then he's like, wait a minute, that was way too easy, that's got to be a fake. And so he sees there's like a basket of laundry, and he starts going through the basket, and he finds the real shroud hidden in the laundry, basically folded like a blanket. And that's when Anna Valmont comes down the steps and has him at gunpoint and everything like that. So she has him drop the shroud and disarm himself, I think. And they have some conversation about why she doesn't just blast him, and she's like, but then I'd have to spend a dreary day cleaning up after myself. And
She's
and
very
everything
clever.
like that. Yeah, she's a fun character, and I wish we got to see her more than the few snippets we get. But yeah, so he drops everything off. I forget what turns, but basically then she comes back around and she's like, well, why don't I just blast you? And he's like, dreary day, remember all that cleaning? And that's when Deidre attacks. So basically she had him cuff one wrist and had him cuff himself to the bulkhead, and as he turns to do that, he sees Deidre coming down the stairwell at him. So that's where we've got basically there was some more right there. Francesca comes out of the shower, even though she's like fully dressed and everything like that, because the person she talked to was Anna Valmont, and they basically set up the trap for him. Go pretend to be in the shower and I'll be there momentarily type of thing. I think he has some thoughts on whether or not it was, like after this anyway, trying to figure out if it was Anna Valmont watching him, probably, or Deidre watching him, also probably. Right. It could be both things. Right. So it's like that meme in the church where it's like everybody's got each other to gunpoint and then Deidre's up here with a sniper rifle, so but yeah, so there's a lot of action for this one, but Deidre attacks and takes the strong box. Basically, she takes the fake. I think Francesca basically starts blasting away at her, panic fire style and whatever. And she basically just like tears through Francesca and then leaves. So
if I remember right, I think Francesca kind of just gets killed, but Anna Valmont just like, or maybe it's when Nicodemus shows up, because I remember this line like, girl after my own heart. She just turns around and starts blasting.
Sure. Yeah.
That's at the hotel, I think.
With Nicodemus then. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of description, there's a lot of action for this, but the gist of it is like you get the whole the demon had like swords for hair that were flexible. It's like Medusa had a bad hair day type of thing, and all of this
CGI budget starts to complain a bit.
Yeah, she's got inverted knees like a lion, and all of this sort of stuff. Yeah, Deidre's creepy looking, right? She's properly horrifying and stuff, and then just cutting into Francesca and everything like that. So yeah, you get another little spike of adrenaline with the action and everything, right? But that's kind of like this book. It's like you got all these little flashes, unlike some of the other books where you pretty much keep it to like 2 usually, maybe with a couple of thugs shooting at you along the way and whatnot. Dresden ends up picking up a legal pad or some other notepad and pocketing that and taking it. After Deidre escapes, the boat starts to sink. And Dresden's, I want to say Dresden was handcuffed to it. So, between a bunch of other stuff, he's able to get away, but he's got the handcuffs still, which becomes important a little bit later. But he wants to go back to help Francesca, but realizes he kind of can't, and she's dead, and that's just going to be how it is. He goes to leave, and a bunch of people in the harbor, both at the parking lot and on nearby boats, have come out to see what's going on as the boat kind of sinks and everything like that. So he goes back to his apartment, I think. He takes a very light chalk, light with the, the pressing, the technique and whatever, and finds out that there's a note about Marriott 2345. And he's trying to figure out if that's a room number or what time that is. Is Marriott a last name? Is it a hotel? What's the deal? And then he's like, keep it simple, stupid. It's probably a hotel, probably a room number. He's just got to figure out which one, because there's multiple Marriotts and whatnot. He also snagged a cell phone and is very careful not to turn it on, but he's going to have to get in touch with Murphy or somebody to, find out who they were calling and whatnot. I wish I had written down more here because there's more Asteroid Dresden foreshadowing here. So this is the second time it gets brought up, which I was like, okay, well, that's kind of notable. Trying to think. Let me look it up real quick. Really? My PDF search isn't going to work right now when I need it. So, because I got to imagine Asteroid appears at least a couple of times in the book. Okay. It's just not going to work for me. One more time, because this is fun. There we go.
This is high quality podcasting.
I know, right?
Professionalism all the way.
All the way. There you go. Yeah. So it's internal dialogue, but it's like the phone rang and I gave serious thought about blasting it into orbit where it could hang around with Asteroid Dresden. So, very important that we took those 30 seconds to answer that. So,
this would be Butters, right? Calling.
Correct. Yeah. I think he had resigned himself to go to the bedroom. He set his alarm clock for a couple of hours after noon. And flopped down on his bed. Naturally, it didn't last. He gets woken up by the ring and he goes, "What? This is Waldo Butters. I was calling to speak to Harry Dresden. Oh, hey, I woke you up, huh? Some? Yeah, late nights suck. Look, there's something odd going on and I thought maybe I could ask you something. Sure. Solon monosyllabism, a sure sign of sleep deprivation. Eh? Now descending into formless vocalizations. My time is short. The germs are gone. Germs? In the samples I took from that body, I ran all the checks again just to be sure, and better than half of them turned up negative. Nothing. Zip zero. Okay then, caveman Og. Where germs go? Sunrise, I said. Poof. Vampire germs? The tiny capes are a dead giveaway, I said. Not vampire germs constructs. At sunrise, it's like the whole magical world gets reset to zero. New beginnings. Most spells don't hold together through even one sunrise, and it takes a lot to make them last through 2 or 3. Magic germs? Are you telling me I've got magic germs? Magic germs, I confirmed. Someone called them up with magic, like an actual magic spell. Usually you call nasty, hurtful spells a curse, but by tomorrow or the next day, those other samples will probably have zeroed out too. Are they still infectious? Assume they are. They're as good as real until the energy that holds them together falls apart. Christ, you're serious? It's for real? Well, yeah. Wizard. So, yeah. Is there a book or a cliff notes or something on this stuff? Just me. Anything else?
And the Necronomicon.
Right. Maybe get a hold of a Bob. Oh, wait. Is that too much foreshadowing? So, let's see. Yeah. So they're talking about, let's see. They're talking about the cuts on the corpse again. Surgical scalpel or some other kind of small, fine blade, maybe a utility knife. Yeah, I've seen cuts like that before. Yeah. Here's the best part. The blade evidently took off the hands and head. The same blade took off the hands and head. The cuts are cleaner than a surgeon can manage on an operating table. 3 single cuts. The heat from it half cauterized parts of the wound. So what kind of tool can cut fine, precise lines and cleave through bones too? Sword? Have to be one hell of a sharp sword. There's a few around like that. Any luck identifying the victim? None. Sorry. So they keep going back and forth. He tells him about the Eye of Thoth. Let's see. He said, keep Murphy up to loop or in the loop. And he said, I called her first and she told me to call you. So let's see. This is the whole sleep as God, go worship line. I use this all the time now.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he can't get anything done. So Susan knocks at the door now. So he basically, somebody knocks at his door and he's like, I need to get one of those wacky slides that like takes people way away and drops them in the mud somewhere. But it's Susan. She does her, this is her kind of like Dear Dresden, letter type of breakup thing. But really she's asking him to come with her and, help her fight the good fight and stuff like that. And he's like, but I got a good fight here, so it's like, but a
It's
fight,
not a
Marty,
bad
in a
offer
fight,
from her. It
sure.
really, it's fitting in what he does. It's just in a different place. Like it is a really good offer or request.
South
or
America's not a good
conversation.
place to want to wear a leather duster. It's a terrible non-starter offer from the beginning.
Well,
So he would
he's
swap
just
it
gonna
with
have
a llama wool poncho. That'd be fine.
he's gonna have to work in his his air conditioning spell, obviously. So
He wouldn't need to
besides
worry
that'll-
about hot water.
right. It'll help the
Ellie would never get
duster
cold.
billow all the time. So because he's just got like a miniature cyclone just running around inside, cooling him off. But
Mhm.
yeah, I noted this one too to give us another digression here right at the end. But this would be another fine nexus point for a mirror Dresden. Because it's like not only do we have the two primaries, right? We've got our Dresden, which of course we'll call Prime, and then we've got Nega Dresden, which is the bad guy. But if he's running around killing other Dresdens, right? Where's the Dresden that decided to go with Susan? Because it would have
Right.
been a near thing. And like you said, I mean, in a way, him leaving, like maybe Ortega is vindictive enough because bad guy that he'll still off a bunch of Dresden's people and whatnot for, escaping the duel or whatnot. But essentially all he does is move the location of the vampire war to the vampires' turf. Right.
Yeah.
And so he can accomplish a lot of the same things just without being in Chicago. It's like, why does he have to be in Chicago? Like, obviously that's the setting, right? But from like a holistic universe world perspective, what keeps him tied to Chicago that anything in the next books he would have to do, right?
So to really think about like the ties that happen in Chicago and why Chicago itself is important, well, the word of Kemmler was found in Chicago. So
Sure.
when we get to Deadbeat, that's important.
Right.
Mab has weapon stocks in Chicago. Not that she doesn't have weapon stocks everywhere.
Right.
And, like,
Well,
it's
because that's the thing. It's like compared to like LA or New York or whatever, right? Like,
right.
So
His brother is in Chicago. Not that he knows that yet.
true.
But also Thomas can travel, does travel, will travel all the time. Demon Reach is right outside of Chicago. That's more of a reason to stay in the area than anything else, but he doesn't know of that. It's not even brought up into the series yet. And
Right.
there's all
Oh,
those
this is
other
actually
things.
probably just about the last point. Maybe this is probably just about the last point, unless you want to assume that he finds out about Thomas later anyway, that he could leave Chicago where all these ties aren't they're there. Murphy's there, and his
Sure.
his first established business is
Michael.
there, and all that stuff. But
Right.
like this is probably the point where he could have gone.
Right. And we could see, like, assuming, for example, that the fact that all of those things are in Chicago is not a convenient little contrivance from the author who wanted his book set in Chicago, but from like a real world perspective, right? Like if we assume that the world is the way it is, regardless of how and when he wrote the books, right? So it's like certainly he doesn't reconnect with Thomas, or at least not as early. He doesn't get a hold of Demon Reach. He doesn't have certain of these other things. But I gotta imagine Peru's got stuff too, right?
Oh, yeah.
So he probably finds different artifacts, levels up in different ways. Maybe the White Council, I don't know, like St. Giles, they're still allies, right? So maybe the White Council actually, because this is kind of how it goes and it never goes in Dresden's favor, they get more cheesed off because he's actually taking the fight to the vampires and he's fanning the flames of the war when they're trying to break it off and whatever. So maybe he gets kicked out sooner, stuff like that.
Or
But,
he's recruited into being a warden sooner.
maybe, sure,
Yeah.
them to try
But-
and keep him close and get their hand on him.
So also at this level that Dresden is at, he's not proficient in uh, traveling through the ways very much at all. And he'll get that when in changes because of his mother's jewel and all that. But he even like going to Edinburgh and back, and like he's done
Mhm.
in the next few books. But right now, it does feel like if he leaves Chicago, he's gone. But as a wizard, it doesn't have to be. He can still have Chicago as a home base and also run around South America.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
it's
I
just
mean, like you said, it becomes a whole lot easier and changes. But if we do get that far, and who he gets the gem from Leah, right? You
mhm.
know, yeah. So I mean, theoretically, like that's the thing. It's like the fairies don't care. Mab's not going to leave him alone just because he goes off to, Peru. So Mab and Leah are still going to be kicking it around, and that's why I was saying it's like the metaphysical side. It makes very little difference other than just bad. Not as many bad things happen in Chicago, but very clearly still the word of Kemmler is there, right? So
Mhm.
does he avert it? Like, I mean, it's the multiverse, so all of the answers are right at the end of the day, right? There are further shards or branches of the multiverse where he does become a warden. Lucio does somehow convince him that they need his help, and he does go back with the baby wardens and stop them in Chicago.
Well, the
There's
easiest
other
way
ones.
is Mab's favor. She just gets him to come back.
Sure. Yep.
And
That was definitely a consideration. He probably winds up at the Battle of Sicily in some of them at that point, because if he's a warden earlier, he's going to be at the Battle of Sicily.
right.
There's the ones where he survives, there's the ones where he doesn't, and then there's the ones where he gets cast out, and probably the Kemlerites win. Um, so those universes have bad times, bad days. So, but yeah, I would just thought it was fun to kind of you know brainstorm that a little bit, and then of course we're like right at the end you know of this episode. But
It yeah. Dresden turned it down because he can't bear leaving home, and that's all really. Like he can't bear to leave Chicago, but he could have.
sure, yeah, I mean, right there wasn't so much keeping him there in
Mhm.
comparison.
Yeah.
He'd save himself a bunch of money not having to hold down his office anymore. He'd have to figure out some other way to eat and whatever, but Susan seems to be doing fine, so whatever
Yeah, no,
the
if he just joins her fight and becomes one of them, I'm sure that there's funding or something to keep them like at least fed so that they
right,
can still fight vampires.
right, you know and then maybe we get some like Soldier of Fortune Dresden where he's like running around helping Susan and Martin do assassinations and shit. So, which that'll be a thing too, because it's like if Martin's like, where do we land on him? Is he a triple agent? Like, what is the deal there? Because
No,
it's
he
like I
just
feel
lied
like
about being a double.
yeah, right. So he was only ever the one kind of agent, but it was a triple cross. So, you know, but
He's
yeah,
the
because
dude
that's the
playing
thing
the
too.
dude disguised as the other dude.
Right? Does he figure that out earlier because it's Dresden, or does it go all the way and we still have Chichen Itza at the end of the day because
It
they
might
they
still.
still want to try to get rid of
Well, I was going to say that's the thing is if he stays with Susan, then obviously he knows he has a kid,
Right, but
and
Maggie can still
if
be
they take
kidnapped.
her,
right.
well, if they kidnap her, that means that either she absconds with her after finding out, or somehow he's stupid enough to allow his own child to get stolen from him from under his nose.
Well, but Maggie was staying with a foster family of sorts, right? And so
Well, but that's because they gave like I don't think if Dresden goes and knows he has a kid, he's not allowing that to happen. Maggie's staying with them if he has a say in it.
I
Otherwise, she has to run
maybe
away while pregnant and essentially making that decision because he's not going to let his kid go off, especially with all his abandonment issues.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. I just, from a practical standpoint, like she's just in as much danger as possible, and as stubborn as Dresden is, like, you know, I could see it being more like I'll be visiting you on weekends type of thing, or he'll make the more effort to see her more often or something. But
I mean, we get
yeah,
that for like 2 books, and then where does she end up anyway? Right? I mean, she stays with the Carpenters
sure,
because he doesn't think he's a good influence and safe for her, and then he still takes her back because one, he's alive again, and two, that's his kid.
sure. I mean, maybe that's the answer, right? Maybe that's our hook back into Chicago. And again, multiverse, right? So none of these are wrong answers. They're just more branches, but they're the branches where instead of whatever family Susan had to leave her with, Maggie goes to the Carpenters and is relatively pretty much as safe as she's gonna be. Um,
Yeah, like everything with Chichen Itza can still happen, and
right,
then South America or anything not America, America is still clearly too dangerous, and so we're going back to the safest place that he knows, which is the Carpenter household, and back
sure.
to Chicago.
Well, and like even thinking about like Small Favor, right? And Ivy getting kidnapped and stuff like that. It's like that doesn't necessarily, not involve Dresden either.
Well, Small
Um,
Favor's interesting. Like Ivy got kidnapped after Ivy was called in by Dresden,
true.
so
To
like
help with
right,
Marcone, right?
yeah, Marcone got kidnapped.
Right,
And like that's like Mab's favor draws him back to Chicago. Marcone still stays in Chicago because that is actually his territory. He has bounds to. So
right.
Mab uses her favor. Marcone gets kidnapped. There's something needs to arbitrate, and then Harry gets Ivy involved. Like he could have like had to fly or walk through the Never Never or something back to Chicago, and
Mhm.
then the rest of the story still plays out.
Right. Yep. Which was important though, because I think Small Favor, at the end of Small Favor, is where Michael gets shot, right? So
Yes.
that's part of what I was saying, because it's like it kind of matters at what point Maggie goes and stays with the Carpenters, because you know
Yes.
of that, and
Especially at the time that Maggie goes to the Carpenters, it is one of the safest households because of his retirement package.
Well, yeah, I was going to
sure,
say, like, she can't be stolen from there as the hook to changes. This would have to be still post
exactly,
everything.
yeah, yeah. So maybe they do try the intermediate foster family, and I mean, just for simplicity's sake, right? Because it's like
Well, I
certainly
mean, yeah, post changes, her going there makes all the sense in the world. It's the same principle, right? He thinks he's going to
right,
kill himself, and that's easy.
right. Yeah, and I'm just thinking what they do for the intervening years, because it's like I can see Dresden trying to do what you're talking about, but at the same time, like he's got to see reason at some point, right? Like he didn't want to get Murphy in danger. Like it's what's he gonna do? He's leaving a baby at home by herself. Like somebody is watching the kid, so maybe they get an au pair or something like that, or they stay with, literally at the like a big building for the Church of St. Giles or something, right? They stay at their local headquarters or whatever. But
I was just about to
you
say
know,
we've forgotten one big element that he doesn't get in the very next book if he leaves this one, and that's Mouse.
sure,
Mm,
yeah. So,
I don't know.
Which would have
but
been which would have been the babysitter anyway at this point if he
it
had him.
fair point. The counter to that though is we still don't know the nature of Mouse cheating. So like we know that he lives with a wizard, so he can cheat like that, but he also does say that he found Dresden, or he claimed Dresden, not the other way around, right? Um, so
But that was proximity too. Like he has to rescue the babies, the little puppies from the
The
burning
babies
building that
can
was
be
on fire,
stolen
not
and
because of
taken to
him.
South America as much as they can be
it,
stolen and
Well,
taken
yes,
to
if we're
Chicago.
rewriting the story, but that's
I
what
know,
I'm
Right.
and
saying
that,
is
yeah,
if it's happening there, then that's where it happened.
right.
Same as Kemmler. Like we could put the word of Kemmler anywhere at that by that logic.
Right. And that's why I'm like trying to separate out of like, let's try and keep it like in world, because if we do, from obviously it's the writer's choice, right? You know, then yes, none of this discussion matters, because any of that stuff could be moved, right?
And it
Merlin
does
could
feel
have
like
built
a
his prison
like
anywhere. So
it does feel like a
yeah.
contrivance that The Word of Kemler was found in Chicago. But whatever, we'll go with it because Deadbeat's fun.
Sure.
But the existence of Demon Reach, wherever you put that, it's staying put. Like it's
Right.
an island. It's not the same thing that like, oh, somebody just put it in a
Right.
different storage locker.
But functionally, what does it matter if it was in, the middle of a lake in Peru or off the coast in Peru versus the middle of nowhere in Chicago? And to me, like, it just makes sense. Like, Merlin just picked somewhere in the New World because nobody else knew about it, which made it that much safer from mortals for a few hundred years. So again, like Peru, theoretically, it wouldn't have been any
Gotta
more
say,
in
South
danger
America
there.
kind of
but
counts as the New World, right? At that point,
Oh, it is.
That's
they
well,
didn't,
that's what
they
I'm
didn't know
saying.
about either. They didn't know about either
Yeah.
Americas.
Like, if unless because this is the Dresden Files, like, Peru with, whether it's the Incans or the Mayans or whomever, like, did they have their own magic systems and they were dealing with their own stuff, right? We haven't really explored that a whole lot outside of the Red Court, because it's like, we know the Babylonians at least dabbled and potentially had dealings with outsiders and stuff like that, right? They at least cross paths with a Shoggoth, if we believe the comics and whatnot. But on Peru, like, you're a major civilization up to a point, right? Did they have their own wizards and their own practitioners and
Well,
stuff
probably.
like that? So
Because they at least had the vampires who had to usurp all that, so they had
right.
monsters.
Sure. Well, and that's part of it too. Like, did Kukulkan coming there basically put the thumb down on them, and they had a reverse inquisition, type of thing where, the vampires went and rooted them out and solidified their power. That makes it kind of sense. Part of where I was getting at with that, though, is like, that would make more sense for the Merlin actually putting it in North America, is because there's no major civilizations there, for example, as opposed to the opposite, right? It's far away from the Red Court's territory. It's far away from, other practitioners that might meddle, stuff like that. So North America would even be more remote, certainly for his time frame.
That became the whole supernatural world's dumping ground until the pesky humans that weren't the natives started coming over and bringing all the old European gods with them.
Yeah, your power's too great. You've hexed your mic, apparently. So we got the gist of it, but
Yeah.
Mike.
Well, I think that's
Maybe
an
that's
out
a
if we've
sign.
ever given one.
I was gonna say, yeah, we went on enough anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So that was part 2. And next week we're doing Fullmetal Alchemist Continued part 3, actually, on that one. We're making decent progress. Very tiring to do, but it's great. It's fun. And then we'll come back with Death Mess the week after that. All the homework. We're doing so much homework.
I know, right? Look at us go.
And if you want to talk about dumb zombie movies in Discord, pay us some dollars.